Thank you, John. It's, like I said, we're all very busy, but John is in there in the background fighting for all of our rights, and I think his organization is a fantastic organization to support if you truly care about free speech here in Canada and especially here in Alberta. Now, our next speaker, you may know him as an upstart social conservative within the Conservative Party of Canada. And if you pay attention to the mainstream media, he's some sort of backwards anti-science climate denier, while at the same time also being a geophysicist for some reason. And he's the MP for Saskatoon University, and he's not going to talk about all those other things I just mentioned today. Actually, he's going to talk about the rise of prairie populism. So please, welcome to the stage, MP Brad Trost.
There you go, let's take the pictures. So, my wife and my mom will happily take all the selfies of me, you can send them. So, anyways, today I want to take a little journey with you. Instead of staying here in Calgary, I wonder if you might want to come with me and go away a little bit of a distance and a little bit of a time. So instead of being here in Calgary, on November the 10th, cold sort of start of winter day, I wonder if you could go away with me to another city, another place, another time. Specifically, I'm wondering if you could come with me to Chicago, Illinois. We'll make the date July 9th, and we'll make the year 1896. Instead of being in a church auditorium, we're in a brand new convention center. It's a big place, seats 15,000 people. You can see the bleachers. People are crowded up there. It's a wonderful place, oak wood everywhere. Big windows that open into Lake Michigan. And the breeze that comes through those windows is really greatly appreciated. And we need that breeze because with 15,000 people in the middle of July in Michigan, this is not always the most pleasant place to be. And we've been here for a couple days. We've been here because we're arguing politics. We've been here because we care about our country. We've been here because we have a bit of a vision. And we've had to endure a lot of speeches. You know, the usual politicians talking with their hot air. But since we're into politics too, we've actually enjoyed some of those speeches. We've cheered a few of them on. One of them we had to boo. We don't know why they invited that clown here, but we were not happy with him. But tomorrow is the real business of the convention, and we are coming down to one final speaker before we go. He's not somebody who everyone knows. Some people have heard of him, some people haven't. But he's a young man. He walks up slowly to the platform, straightens himself, and gets ready to speak. There's nothing remarkable about him. He's wearing a short black jacket, baggy black pants. His wavy hair is pushed back. But he begins to speak, and we begin to listen. The first thing we notice about him is he doesn't have any notes, no papers, nothing. He's speaking clearly and directly from the heart. He's talking to you, he's talking to me. This is a man who cares and knows the subject he's talking about. And what is he talking about? He's talking about the people he knows. This man used to be a congressman from Nebraska. So he's talking about the farmers of Nebraska. He's talking about the people who actually plow the soil, who plant the seed. He's talking about the people who actually grow the food that is important to you and to me. He says it very clearly. If the cities of our country are destroyed, they will be built up again. They will rise again from the farms. But if we destroy our farms, our cities will vanish. They will go quietly without a noise. But it's not just the farmers that he's speaking for. He's out there arguing for the working man, for people who are having a hard time making their living, for people who are struggling to pay the bills, for people who cannot afford the necessities of life. And it's not just the farmers, it's not just the working man that he's speaking for. He's speaking for the small towns of America, for the shopkeepers whose businesses have been going under. He's speaking for you, he's speaking for me. Well, these are difficult times, and this is important what he's speaking about. The man has a cause, he has a vision, he has a way of actually solving our problems. He cares about you, he cares about me. And remember, this is 1896, only 3 years away removed from the panic of 1893. A great economic depression, a recession so severe that in contemporary times, economic historians estimate that the unemployment rate of the United States was 25%, higher than at any other time except in the Great Depression. He continues to speak. We understand his imagery. It's literally biblical. He says these words, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns." He throws out his arms and says, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." His head leans back, he bows forward, and then quietly he exits the stage. At that moment, the whole auditorium erupts. They scream, they cheer. They have found their leader. They have found the man who will speak for them. Now, if you had actually been there on that day in July the 9th, 1896, you would have heard what is known as one of the 3 greatest political speeches in American political history. It's a speech given by former Congressman William Jennings Bryan, a speech famously known as the Cross of Gold speech. Now, William Jennings Bryan was a bit of an interesting character, one of the people who actually dominated the history of his era and got involved in the politics. He'd previously been a congressman for Nebraska, representing not only the Democratic Party, but actually the Populist Party as well. And while he definitely represented the big P Populist Party, he was also very much the leader of the small p populist movement. But what is populism? How does it matter? And why is it important to us today? Well, first of all, let's define what populism is. We've heard it often talked about in the press. Perhaps you see the CBC chattering away, blah, blah, blah. No, we don't watch the CBC here. Perhaps you've seen someone else chattering away going, blah, blah, blah. Donald Trump is a populist. The new president in Brazil is a populist. The Ford brothers in Ontario, populist, 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 populist. But what do they actually mean when they talk about populism? Well, populism is a very simple concept. Populism happens when people feel they're not being represented by the political elites of their society. Now, every society has its own set of elites. Some societies have religious elites, which call the shots. Others have business elites. Others, academia, media, whoever has the power, the influence, etc. And we see this repeatedly throughout history, that people often get frustrated that their voice is not heard, that their values are not shared, that someone out there is not actually speaking for them. And every so often, they go out of the way to create a political movement to get something going that actually speaks for the voice of the average person, someone who doesn't have access to the elite opinion, someone who doesn't have access to the powers that be. That ultimately is what we call populism. Now, some cultures are actually much more open to populism than other cultures are. Now, I come from Saskatchewan. We have not only the best football fans in the whole country. You were wondering what I was going to say there. We are the breadbasket of Canada. And we actually do have, and this is a scientifically provable fact, better beef than Alberta has. And right there, I lost the crowd. But Saskatchewan, as is true in Alberta and Manitoba and the rest of the prairies, we don't really have that much of a social hierarchical structure. We're not like Great Britain when they have dukes and lords and different things like that. We're not like the eastern United States. The U of S is not an Ivy League institution, and the U of C is sort of a minor institution. You know, we just don't have that. So here in the prairies, we're very much open to populist politics. People can rise from the grassroots. I mean, let's face it, almost everyone who lives in the prairies, their ancestors arrived here, almost everyone, 100 years ago or less. So populism is actually something culturally that we are very comfortable with. We don't think of it as something different or strange or foreign, even though it may sound that way when journalists are talking about it in other parts of the world. So if you come from Saskatchewan, you're used to dealing with populist politicians like John Diefenbaker, the man who fought for the little guy out there. His corporate law office was a shack in Waka, Saskatchewan, not some big office suite in Toronto. And Canada, and particularly the prairies, has been very open to populists. Some of them, you know, like Diefenbaker, Preston Manning, I think most people would put in the populist category. People like Tommy Douglas. In the prairies, we have a lot of politicians who would be considered populist. And the United States as well has definitely had its share of populism. In fact, I would say the Western Hemisphere has been much more open to populism than Western Europe with their more hierarchical societies. In fact, probably the first successful populist politician in the United States was Andrew Jackson. He was a former general, actually fairly wealthy, fairly well educated, but in the 1820s, politics in the United States had been dominated by the plantation class and the financial money elites of New York and New England. And while Jackson was very educated and very high in the society, his support base was very much people who were outside the power structures, people from the frontiers, people who actually needed to have a voice. And in 1828, he led them to office and to power. So when we talk about William Jennings Bryan and his speech in 1896 on the Cross of Gold, he's very much following in a tradition that is hardly unique to him. It's very much part of North America, particularly the west and the south of this continent. And after the Civil War, the Republicans had established themselves in the north of the United States, and the Democrats were busy, you know, cheating the African Americans of votes in the South and rebuilding their base there and putting inroads into various other areas. And not everyone felt that they were being properly represented by the parties of that time. So new political parties were being born. And one of the most successful third new parties of that era that was formed was actually a party by the name of the People's Party. So Max happens to have borrowed it. But the People's Party was actually better known by a different name, and that was the Populist Party. And William Jennings Bryan was elected as a congressman, not just for the Democrats, but also for the Populist Party in Nebraska. And he gave this Cross of Gold speech at the 1896 Democrat Convention, where he became their nominee and became the Populist Party candidate. Now, I like William Jennings Bryan. He was very much a man of the people. He stood for farmers, he stood for working men. If you were someone who tried to earn an honest living, William Jennings Bryan was very much your guy. Hey, he was a farmer from the prairies. Now, his football team wouldn't have been the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but other than that, everything about him would have been, well, almost everything about him would have been awesome. Because here's one thing to note about William Jennings Bryan. He may have been a man of the people, he may have actually been a populist, he may have actually stood and fought for those who were forgotten, but he was dead wrong on his policy perspectives. In fact, William Jennings Bryan's two biggest policy ideas, one was to introduce the income tax. He was going to tax the United States back to prosperity. How has that worked where it's been tried? The second thing he was going to do was he was going to change the monetary base system and move it from gold to a more system where silver was much more important. And what they were essentially going to do is expand the money supply and create inflation. So they were going to drive up inflation and they were going to drive up taxes. And how in the world was that going to help? And this guy was the voice of populism. But here's the thing about populism. Populism is neither really a good thing nor a bad thing. It is an expression of people who have not had their voice heard or their power recognized, and they want to actually have the elites get involved and change something, but it's not happening. So they take their own responsibility, they take their own initiative to create something that will speak for them. And populism can be both good and it can be bad. And if you come from the prairies, you actually know and have lived this. Because in the prairies, we have a few provinces, two of them side by side. One of them elected a populist government. We'll call this province Alberta. And they elected someone called the Social Credit. The other province, for all its wonderful, marvelous beauty and grace and importance to the country, we kind of made a mistake. But we elected a populist government too, the CCF, the forerunners to today's NDP. Now the thing is this, if you actually look at the demographics of those two political parties way back when, very similar. In fact, my hometown, Melville, Saskatchewan, voted for the Social Credit Party before it voted CCF and NDP. After voting for the Social Credit in one election, it took another 60 years before any right-wing party actually won the vote in my hometown of Melville. So the same voters who could vote CCF could vote Social Credit. And in Alberta, while it started out as a bit of a funny money sort of party, the Social Credit developed into very much free enterprise, pro-growth. In Alberta, the Social Credit did not chase away oil companies by trying to seize them and nationalize mining companies. We did that in Saskatchewan. I mean, Saskatchewan did a lot for Alberta by chasing investment from our province to your province. Now, in all fairness, we can thank your current premier for doing the reverse. But this is my point. Populism is not something that's good or bad. William Jennings Bryan, as I said, is someone I admire. He was an awesome man, a man of faith, a man who cared for people. But his opponents in that election, the Republicans under William McKinley, actually were the people with elite opinion. So I don't view populism as good or bad. I view it as something that we need to take advantage of. And I view it as something here in North America that we in the right need to take advantage of because we have a golden opportunity. Almost all those people I talked about who were populists, you'd probably put in the good category when I was talking earlier. The Fords, the Trumps, the various other things, the Brexit in Great Britain. Because here in North America, maybe not so much in other parts of the world like Latin America, the left has completely ignored and abandoned populism. My province of Saskatchewan, Stephen Harper was once marveling to us as Conservative MPs saying, how in the world did you guys go from being the most left-wing province in the country to being the most right-wing province in the country? Well, I've got a secret for Stephen. Saskatchewan in politics is like Saskatchewan and time change. We actually stayed the same. Everyone else changed. Because the average Saskatchewan voter backed the CCF NDP not because they were socialists, but because they were populists. And as much as it pains me to say this, the NDP and CCF of a previous era in Saskatchewan actually tried to meet people's needs. Just as the Social Credit did in Alberta, they were more interested in delivering for people than they were in anything else. And that's the lesson we as conservatives, supporters of free enterprise and freedom, need to take away. The left in North America has become totally captured by their academic elite. They're chattering class types on the journalism, on the universities, on places like that. And that has left us with a golden opportunity. Because populists are not so much concerned about where you come from. They want an answer. They want something that actually meets their needs. They want someone to speak for them. And this is the beauty of the situation. When one side of the aisle is not even trying to do it, we have an opportunity. Now, I'm very comfortable as a populist. I have no problem. I'm a farm boy from rural Saskatchewan. This is who I am. This is my culture. But for me, the question is not populism or not. For me, the question always will be freedom or not, liberty or not. Do we support slavery or do we support free enterprise? But we have an opportunity, be it in the elite institutions, which we are fighting with the left, or in the populists of the society, which they have abandoned. We have an opportunity to stand for freedom, to go forward. So, when you hear about populism, think about how we can deliver, how we can bring forward and bring freedom, both now and for future generations. Thank you very much, and God bless.